How are we at the 11 a.m. today? Okay. I feel like you had to think about that a little too much. How you doing, Roderick? You good, man? In 2 weeks, I told you about this before, we're starting a brand new series called Investigating Jesus. And this is a big deal because we're going to go through the book of Luke, how we know, why we follow. This is an incredible series if you want to grow your faith, which some of you are actually interested in that. And it's an incredible series if you know somebody who's curious about faith. And one of the things that we really highlight around here is investing and inviting, because we're a church for the city and community. So if you've been here for a little while and you haven't invited anybody in a minute, this is your prompt. This is the time. So March 9th, bring somebody with you. And I say this all the time because I've experienced it so much. You have no idea what God's going to do on the other side of 30 seconds of courage to invite somebody. So Investigating Jesus is going to go all the way up to Easter. And those are two incredible times to invite. So get on that, and we'll see you on March 9th in 2 weeks. Today, we're in part 2 of this series called Money Talks. And here's what I'm asking you to do right up front. And some of you, you're going to not like this. Others of you, it's going to be more uncomfortable than others, more complicated than others. And I get all that. But I'm going to ask you to flip the script on your entire financial world. And again, immediately when you start talking about this, there's a awkward, tension-filled silence. I get all that. And I would say what I say often, you don't have to do anything that I say. Some of you, as I've said, often do that every week. So you just go your way, go to lunch, like, that was great, I'm not doing any of that. So you could do that. But literally, this has the potential, and I'm not overstating this, to transform your life. In fact, even last week when we introduced this series, I talked with so many people who said, I wish, because I implemented this a long time ago, I wish everybody could really grab a hold of this and actually do this, because it has transformed our lives, and I want that for you. So I'm going to ask you to flip the script on your financial world. But here's what we said last week in this series called Money Talks, that if your money could give you advice, which maybe you don't want it to, what would it say? And for a lot of us, we would not be shocked, I don't think, by what our money would say. We kind of know we don't really want it to talk to us. But the thing would not be, shocked by what our money would say. We maybe would be more shocked by what Jesus did say. And what's interesting, it may be shocking to you if you weren't here last week, Jesus talked about money more than heaven in the New Testament. 30-some parables, 16 of them were about wealth, money, and possessions, which is crazy if you think about it. I mean, there's a lot of important stuff to talk about. And here's some of the reasons I think Jesus did this. The first is this, because for some of us, there is no money would be worse than there is no heaven today. Because you're like, well, this is a long way off. I'll figure it out. It doesn't seem that imminent. But literally, the visceral emotional reaction to some of you, if your bank account was cleared out, you didn't have any money, your retirement was gone, you would react more emotionally to that than if I got up and did a series about how there is no heaven. It's such a big deal for us, and we feel it so much. But then the other reason I think Jesus talked about money more than he did heaven is for this reason, because money consistently overpromises and underdelivers. And some of us know that. It's interesting that some of us have this benchmark. If I just get here, then this is going to be the thing, and I'm going to feel good. My life's going to feel good. And then you've already gotten to that benchmark, and now you're chasing another one. There's always that next thing, next raise, next promotion. It always overpromises and underdelivers. And the promise of money is always this, is just a little bit more, and I'll finally deliver. Isn't that true? And in fact, I would just say this. This is kind of why we stay stuck in a lot of areas of our life, because constantly we buy into this illusion or this lie that we can make the same bad decision over and over and over again. And the reason people keep chasing it, because have you ever on the outside looked at somebody else and go, you've made that decision 9 times in a row? Or you've dated them 9 times in a row, or whatever the thing is. And it's worked out bad every time. And then they do it again for a 10th time. And you're like, how could you be so stupid? And then other people look at our lives, though, and go, how could you be so stupid? And I'll tell you why we're so stupid. And I'm including me in this, because we consistently buy into the lie of one more of what doesn't work will finally work. And so we deceive ourselves into thinking, it hasn't worked up into this time, but the next one is going to, and we stay stuck in different areas of our life, including financially. So with all that said, if your money could talk to you, what would your money say? Here's what we said last week. If your money could talk, your money would tell you that I can add meaning to your life, but I am not the meaning of life. And actually, when you follow Jesus' example in terms of how to handle your stuff, the crazy thing is you actually enjoy your stuff more as you use it within the context that God's created. But your money would go, listen, just so you're aware, when you get to the end of your life, I'm not getting any airplay at your funeral. Nobody is talking about me. I can add meaning. I'm not the meaning. And in fact, the only way to make money and possessions meaningful is for them to be a means to an end. that's bigger than you. In fact, that's what makes anything in life meaningful. Any kind of thing or individual or whatever, when they live or function for a greater purpose, for a bigger kind of idea or agenda that's beyond just this moment, that's what gives anything meaning, including our lives. And so last week we said, this is really the question for you. And if you don't do anything else in this series, like, I'm not listening to him, I'm not doing that, that's fine. You should answer this question. To what end do I want my life to be a means? To what end do I want my life to be a means? That's beyond me, beyond this moment, and is being lived for a greater purpose, because I would argue from the scriptures that you were created for this. And when you begin to answer this question, your life and your decisions and your money will become a means to an end as well. Now, there's one other thing that your money would say, and that is, for all of us, this is kind of where I want to camp out today. If your money could talk to you, it would just tell you your self-control is the thing that determines which of us gets control. Like, if your money could talk, it would tell you, hey, either I'm going to get control or you're going to get control, but your self-control determines what gets control. Can you guys just say that with me real quick so I know you're still with me? Your self-control determines which of us gets control. Now, what I'm going to say, everybody wants to argue and not believe, and I get it, and I understand. And I'm just going to say this. There are extreme stories represented here among people who are watching and listening online, so I'm always aware of that. I live in the realm of extreme stories. That's kind of my life in terms of what I do, so I get all that. But with the extremes aside, for the majority of us, we buy into this lie that like our financial pressure that we feel has everything to do with how much we have. And the reality is, the financial pressure you feel does not have to do with how much you have. It has everything to do with what you do with what you have. Now, nobody believes that, but here's that part of the reason I know. If you sat down with half the world's population, and I'm underestimating, it's really more than that. But if you sat down with at least half the world's population and you described to them the financial pressure that you feel, they would look at you like you were crazy. They would not understand the words that were coming out of your mouth. If you sat down with somebody, about more than half the world's population, and you described, and again, I think nobody thinks they're in this category, but just go with me. If you described how much money you make, and how much financial pressure you feel, they would look at you like you were insane. They wouldn't even understand it because, again, we don't want to acknowledge it. But according to the world statistics, many of you, if not most of you, are some of the wealthiest people in the world, and nobody considers themselves that because you live in the United States of America. But you're one of the wealthiest people in the world, and yet we feel so much financial pressure because we live with no margin. In fact, in many cases, we continue to elevate our lifestyle with what we make. And some of you know this because you started out as like a broke college student or, in your marriage with an apartment you could barely afford, and yet somebody had taught you how to live this way. And so you didn't feel the financial pressure other people felt. And it wasn't because you were making a lot of money. It's because you learned how to live with margin. It has everything to do with what you do with what you have and not how much you ultimately have. And that's why when we get to kind of certain seasons in our life, we think, well, if I only had more money, and your money would tell you, well, if only you had more self-control. Because your self-control is what determines who and what gets control. That ultimately it guides your life. And so your money would ultimately tell you, I am a better servant than I am a master because ultimately I go where you send me. And the reality for all of us is we have way more control over this than we realize and that we want to admit. And so Jesus talks about this all throughout the New Testament, maybe uncomfortably for some of us, but this is where our finances and our faith intersect. And now if you're not a Jesus follower, I say this every week, you don't have to do any of this. In fact, this might be the day where you're like, well, I'm glad I'm not a Jesus follower. None of this applies to me. But my hope would be, as I say often, you would begin to apply Jesus' teachings and maybe come to the conclusions that Jesus is actually who Jesus said he is. But if you are a follower of Jesus, we always want to separate this into another box. But this is where our faith and our finances intersect. In fact, this is what Paul said in the New Testament to a group of Galatian Christians, and I'm going to tie this into how it relates to this subject. But here's what he wrote Galatian Christians in the first century. He said, so I say, walk by the what? Spirit. Now, thank you. Walk by the Spirit. Keep coming with that energy right there. Walk by the Spirit. Now, for some of you, you grew up with this, and it was so ethereal. Like, I don't know what this means. That was me a lot of times. It's just, give me some practical, 3 steps. But really, all he's saying is this. This is specifically as a follower of Jesus, when you feel that internal nudge, To go, yes, you need to do that. No, you need to quit that. You need to move forward in this direction. You need to pay attention to that tension. It's that internal prompting. It's that thing inside of you, that angst where you know you need to act. This isn't necessarily some big new revelation. This is just the stuff we already know that then we ignore. And sometimes we lie to ourselves and then we hide behind narratives so we can do what we want to do. And he's like, as you begin to lead your life as a follower of Jesus, where you pay attention to those promptings of yes, no, that angst, you need to act on this thing, and you actually do it consistently over and over and over again, you literally learn how to kind of lean into the voice of God, not audibly, but just those promptings of God's leading you to live your life within the rhythm of how he's created you. So he says, so walk by the Spirit, pay attention to that. And by the way, the more you do it, the better you get at it. But then he says this is the direction that the Spirit of God is going to prompt Jesus followers every single time. And he says this. So when you are filled by the Spirit, and the fruit of the Spirit is this. And just by the way, the list that he lists, this is what we want from people around us, right? This is what we hope our husband or wife acts like. This is what we want from our in-laws. This is how we hope our neighbors behave. This is what we want from our friends. So he said, this is the promptings that listening to that nudge will take you every single time. Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. And this is the one that never gets any airplay, but it's in the list. And what? Self-control. We never mention this one, but literally, as you submit to that voice, those promptings of, yes, I need to go, or I need to say no, or I need to act on this, the more you do that, the more the Spirit of God will lead you towards self-control in every area of your life. That literally, this is just interesting to me, that one of the byproducts of whether you are being led by the Spirit of God and really full on following Jesus in all of your life is this right here. Now, here's what's interesting. It shouldn't be surprising to us that the Spirit of God, and as we submit to the Spirit of God, would lead us in the direction of self-control in every area of our life, because here's the reason why. Every single one of these things on this list, every single one of these wars against the internal appetites of our soul. Every single one of these. Like there is a war going on between the appetites of our soul, the appetite for more, enough, for pleasure, upgrade one more time, whatever it is, including the appetite for more stuff and more security. And you've heard me talk about this before, but in appetite, and there's a lot of appetites. There's appetites for sex and pleasure and money and recognition and identity. There's a ton of appetites internally that all of us have. And those appetites by themselves are not bad. But every good desire can be distorted and used out of context, where suddenly they kind of begin to rule us. And I've said this about appetites before, but appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. The more that you feed an appetite outside of the context it was created, the more that appetite grows. And so it should be no surprise to us that the Spirit of God would nudge us in the direction of self-control in every area of our life, because God already knows what many of us have maybe learned the hard way. Nobody wants to be mastered by an appetite. Nobody wants to be mastered by an appetite. Nobody wants to say yes to something so many times and then it begins to kind of go out of context, where they say yes so many times that eventually they can't say no anymore. And if I just be honest, among a lot of people who are watching or listening or you're in the room today, they've spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying to overcome appetites that eventually dominated their life. And Jesus says, I'm a good master. I'm a good king, and I want to lead you in a better direction. And if you're a follower of Jesus, and you may not feel like it in the moment, but you have been ultimately given the ability to not be overcome or mastered by any appetite in your life, because you have a bigger, greater master, and you have the Spirit of God inside of you. And I don't want you to live your life like this. In the parable that we looked at last week, at the end of that parable, Jesus says this brilliant statement that we didn't get to, that maybe you've heard these words, but in this context, here's what he says. He says, no one can serve two what? Masters. No one can serve two masters. Greek kurios, meaning to be in charge of by virtue of ownership. Nobody can kurios. Nobody can serve two masters at the same time. And you're like, well, this was written to an ancient culture, and I don't have a master. And Jesus is like, well, hold on. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and what? And some of you know the end of that verse, but if you grew up with this and you've heard it before, we kind of lose the shock value of this. But I am absolutely convinced if we saw this for the first time and it really resonated to the point that we believed that it was true, I am convinced we would walk out of here and we would change a ton about our lives. I mean, do you know how shocking this is? Like if I was finishing this verse, and I grew up with it, so I already know the ending. But I would think, well, it's like Jesus in one corner of the ring, and then it's the devil or Satan in the other one. Or it's some kind of enemy or some kind of force. But you're telling me the chief competition for our lives, for our devotions, for our desires is God and our stuff? I'm telling you, if that hit us in a way that we actually believed it, it would change everything. Because there's a lot of stuff we should pay attention to. There's a lot of enemies. There's a lot of things trying to undermine our lives, undermine our futures, lead us in a direction that we don't want to know that we should be paying attention to. And yet God says of all of those things that you're paying attention to, those threats that you see to your faith and your relationship to God, this is the biggest one. That you can't serve God and your pursuit of stuff to the point that you think when you get there, it is going to fulfill you and provide you with what you're not currently getting. And in a lot of cases, here's how you know if it's become a master. You're willing to stiff arm God or circumvent certain promptings of God in order to get there. He's like, you can't serve God and your stuff. In fact, Jesus said this, and again, you don't have to believe it, but take it up with Jesus. Read the Gospels. Jesus said this: the chief competitor for your heart and your desires and your devotion is your stuff. That's crazy. The chief competitor for your heart is your stuff, is your money. It's maybe more so the case for us than any generation anywhere in the world. I think Jesus would say this. The question is, does money have you or do you have money? Do you have money or does money have you? And here's the answer that everybody gives to this question, almost 100%, universal, every generation, different economic brackets, everybody says the same thing. It doesn't have me because I don't have enough of it to have me. That's why everybody gets it out on these verses, because they're like, Jesus, that's great. I know some people I need to send this to. In fact, I'm going to send this podcast to them today. My in-laws need this, but nobody thinks it's them because like, well, I don't have enough for it to be me. In fact, some of us are praying, hey, God, just test me. Give me enough and see what I do with it, right? But no, nobody has enough. So who is Jesus talking to? Who's he talking to? I think he's talking to most of us. I mean, again, we don't think about this, and you got stuff to do and a job and a life, and, you know, who has time to read? But if you look at more than this conservative, more than half the world's population, they would sit down with you and they would not understand most of your conversations. They'd be like, let me get this straight. You have clean drinking water all the time, and then you throw it on your grass once or 3 times a week if you're shady, and you use it. You do, like they would sit down with you and go, okay, I don't understand the world that you live in. So you have a house for your car, you call it a garage. You have a house for your car that's probably better insulated than my house. Like, how does that work? They would look at some of you and go, you work 5 days a week and you get paid for 7 and you still have enough food. How is that possible? Or for some of us, you go on vacation and somebody still gives you a paycheck to go on vacation. What alternate universe are you living in? They wouldn't understand your conversation. They wouldn't understand your life. They wouldn't understand that you can click and buy stuff anytime you want, and then it shows up and you got to weed through what you bought and you can't really remember. They wouldn't even understand our life, or the fact that you leased that thing even though the other thing was still fine, and you dumped a ton of money into a depreciating asset that's not going to give you anything in return. That's why I don't know if this is good parenting, but I'll constantly just drive down the road and I'll say, hey kids, look at all these cars. Nobody can afford these statistically, nobody. And if they can, generally they're terrible decisions. But they wouldn't even understand. So we think, no, money doesn't have me. I don't have enough. But so who is Jesus talking to? And here's the reality. Jesus is talking to everybody because everyone is at risk at making money their ultimate pursuit or their ultimate concern, regardless of their tax bracket. You can have almost nothing, or you can have a ton of everything, and you still have the potential, because this is not an amount. You have the potential, you have the risk of making it your ultimate pursuit or ultimate concern, which by definition makes it ultimate. Isn't it crazy too for some of us? Like, we're so willing to surrender other things to God. We're like, God, take all of my dysfunction, all of my sin, I give that to you. All of my sadness and hurt, I'm surrendering that to you. I mean, for many of us in this room or watching online, you're like, I trust you with my eternity, like forever. God, I'm trusting you with that. I mean, it's even interesting, people who are not sure about God, how many people pray to a God they're not sure they believe in when things start to, and I'm not making fun, that's just something we do, even if it's like to whom it may concern. I mean, you start out the prayer that way because you're not sure, but you're like, this is probably the time I pray. We just all do it. Sin, sadness, eternity, God, I surrender all of that to you. You know why? Because we don't feel in control of any of that. We don't have any other options. But isn't it so funny how difficult it is to surrender at the level of our stuff and our possessions and our money? And Jesus was so clear. This is not about me getting your money. Jesus is like, I'm good. This is about money not getting you. And again, follow Jesus through the Gospels. Jesus was so clear that this whole topic is about the issue of surrender, because if you haven't surrendered what you haven't really surrendered. Jesus would say, if you haven't given me access to what you have, you haven't really given me access to your life. Now, here's the thing, though. All of that creates a tension in all of us because we got stuff to do. And, I mean, money is also to be enjoyed. The scriptures talk all about that. We got to get kids through college or whatever, or you're just trying to survive the next week. I mean, whatever your situation is. So all of it creates a tension. So Jesus addresses the tension in the language that we would understand, which is priorities. And, again, maybe you know these verses. He said this, seek what? But seek first. This is the guardrail to keep you from the seduction of more and better and enough, and if we just get a little bit more, and if I just get that thing, if we just get that raise. This isn't about either or. This is about the priority of. This is what Jesus teaches all throughout the New Testament. So he says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. I'm not telling you either or. I'm not saying that you have to choose. That's not how this works. And in fact, I have placed things in your hand for your good and even your enjoyment and my glory. But this is how I have created you to operate if you're a follower of Jesus. And you have the choice of whether you actually want to follow me or not, or whether you just want insurance for when you die. But this is what it looks like. Seek first my kingdom and seek first my righteousness. And you've heard me talk about this a lot. Jesus could not have been clearer. I'm going to come back to a whole series about this in the fall. His kingdom is an others first kingdom. Jesus said, if you want to follow me, it's an others first, subversive, upside down. Somebody should have told you when you decided to follow Jesus, you put everybody else first and yourself second, which sounds awful, but it's actually the key counterintuitively of life to the full. I want you to put my kingdom first, my upside down, others first kingdom. And I want you to seek first my righteousness. And the clearest picture that you can get of righteousness, just to define it for you, if you want to know what righteousness looks like, watch Jesus, who fearlessly and courageously put other people first, put you first. And he says to you, if you're going to follow me, I am inviting you into an others first kingdom where you don't go first anymore. And you're going to find in that place, you're not going to believe it until you do it and live this way, more joy and more peace and more fulfillment and more meaning than you're going to find any other way, because suddenly your life will become a means to an end that's not you. And literally Jesus said, that's the key to happiness. That's the key to life. That's the key to fulfillment. That's the key to peace that surpasses all understanding. You got to seek my kingdom and my righteousness first. And then Jesus put this on display in ways that are unimaginable. He's on the way to Jerusalem to die. And maybe some of you know the story. His disciples are behind them arguing about who's going to be second in his kingdom, which they think is going to be a political movement. And so they're like, okay, when you set up your throne as king, can we have a prime cabinet position as second in that kingdom? And Jesus hears the talk, so he turns around to them as they're on the way to Jerusalem and says, hey, you guys want to be great? And they're like, yeah, that's what we're talking about. And Jesus is like, okay. Do you want to be great? Just so you know, my kingdom is not going to be like any of the kingdoms of this world, which is why it's so hard to wrap our minds around. In my kingdom, other people are going to go first, and you are willfully going to choose to go second. And then he says to his disciples, you know how the rulers of the world leverage their power. They leverage their power, and they leverage their influence, and they leverage their status, and they leverage their wealth for the sake of themselves. And I think the disciples are like, I know, that's why we want to be second in your kingdom. That's what we want to do. And Jesus turns them. It's such a dramatic moment. And quote, you guys, not so, eye contact, Peter, Andrew, James, John, not so with you guys. Not in my kingdom. And not in my new movement. I'm going to ask you to flip the script on everything. And I'm going to ask you to follow me into an others first kingdom where you put my righteousness on display. And then many of you know he put this into practice and he gave an example they would never forget. Because eventually the king, this is so different than our world, the king, rather than requiring his subjects to give their life for him, the king would give his life for his subjects. So we would know what this looks like and the world would never be the same again. And then he would turn to his disciples after those moments on Easter weekend and say, this is another first kingdom that I'm inviting you guys into. Are you guys down with that? And they were. And now, he's inviting us into that same kind of kingdom where he said, I want you to prioritize my others first kingdom. The way I see the world, the way I see people, the way I see life, I want you to put me first. I want you to flip the script on everything. And then what's interesting though is again, the tension's still there because you're like, yeah, but what about my kids? And what about my job? And what about college? And what about this next season? And what about the business? And Jesus is like, no, this isn't either or. This is 1 and 2. But seek first my kingdom and my righteousness and all of these things, not it's perfectly going to work out. And if you just pray enough and give enough, God's going to, do whatever you want. I said this last week, and this is pretty harsh language. So if I offend anybody, I cannot stand prosperity theology teaching. And by the way, if you find that a teaching only works in one area of the world, it's probably not from Jesus. Because prosperity teaching does not work in third world countries. It only works here. Where it's like, well, if you give 1, God's going to give 10 back. I said last week, you're in the United States of America. Most of you already got your 10. In comparison to, that is not Jesus' promise. But the promise is, all this stuff that you're worrying and obsessing about, I just want you to know I'm for you because anybody who dies for you is for you. Seek first my kingdom and my righteousness. And the things that you're looking for out of life, all these things will be given to you as well. Not either or. 1, 2. Jesus is going, somebody's kingdom has to come first. I'm telling you, if you believe that I am the Son of God who came, gave my life, and then resurrected from the grave, I'm telling you, it should be my kingdom. And I'm inviting you into this. Because Jesus was brilliant, and he knew what many of us have learned the hard way. We figured out at some point that when you say yes to you and put you first, you come in last. When you put you first, you come in last. It's just a fact because of what I already said. You can say yes to you so many times. You can say yes to your appetite so many times. You can say yes to this thing. And again, it's not just in the area of money. It's in a lot of areas that you can say yes. You can give into those appetites. You can give into those desires. And eventually you say yes to them too many times out of context. And you will not be able to say no to them anymore. Putting you first never ends up well. And Jesus knew that because however you think God did it, if you believe this, I believe it because Jesus referenced it. You're a created being. And you were created to seek first your creator. I just want to tell you, if you don't get anything else, just go away with this. This is how, you may not believe it. This is how you were manufactured. This is how you were created. This is how God put you together. And so this may explain some things about our lives or about your life. When you don't do this, your life becomes disordered because you were created to seek first your creator. So the question in all of that, okay, is what do we do? And Jesus was really clear, specifically in the area of your money and finances, but this relates to other areas as well, of course. But you got to put somebody first. And Jesus is going, you need to put my kingdom and my righteousness first. Here's how the majority of us, again, I'm going to poke a little bit. This is the majority of Americans, and I'm not, this is just statistically. So don't get mad at me. It's me first living. It's live, save, give. It's live, save, give. I'm gonna live, we're gonna get our thing, we need to get this, we need to buy this, we need to upgrade this, we're gonna go on vacation. Then a lot of like really good stuff. It's not wrong stuff. It's morally neutral, but like I'm gonna live, I'm gonna get our thing, I'm gonna figure out what we need to buy. Oh, I didn't plan on that. And we just live. And then hopefully you save, but even that's a little bit shaky, or hopefully your business does it for you. And so that just kind of helps with the discipline side of it. But we live and then we save and then we see if we have anything at the end to give. For some of us, we get to the end and realize, well, I don't, because I lived on 110% of my income, because I didn't decide ahead of time. Or others, well, we consumed 99.5% of it, and we lived and upgraded and went on vacation, and we did get some saving in there. And then we have 0.5% left over to give. And so then we give, and then we feel really good about ourselves. And Jesus is like, that's me first living. That's me first living with leftover giving. And that's just how the majority of people live. And if you want to do that, that's fine. That's normal. That's how pretty much everybody, specifically in our country, tends to live. And you can get mad about that. Statistically, they'll just tell you, the more that we make, the less that we give away. It's me first living with some leftover giving. This is Jesus' priority in terms of your money. This is seek first living if you believe that I rose from the dead and that maybe I'm the Son of God. Give, save, live. Give, save, live. Just say this real quick with me, even if it's through clenched teeth and you're like, I don't want to do this and whatever, just do it anyway. Give, save, live. One more time. Give, save, live. It is, and again, this is crazy. This is puts you in kind of unicorn category. I'm going to give first off of the top. I'm going to pre-decide, we said this last week, what amount of my income I'm going to live on before I even start living on it. Like for this next year, pre-decide what amount of my income I'm going to live on, what amount I'm going to save, what amount I'm going to give. That puts you way ahead of most people, but you've got to pre-decide it to give and then to save and then to live. And some of you, I heard from so many people last week, you've done this for a long time and it's changed your life. And I'll just make this argument. The people who do this are better financial stewards and generally better with their money because it forces you to be. That I'm going to live, and again, we think, well, you don't understand my financial, listen. When I started out with my wife and we were living off her Christian school teacher salary, which, that's not a lot. And if you teach at a Christian school, thank you, or any school. But we were trying to get the church going. We had no money, and it was interesting, and we think back to this. We didn't feel a lot of financial pressure, and we didn't have much at all. But we had the choice of living at or below our means, regardless of how much we made. And so even during that time, there's a lot we did without. It was a difficult season, don't get me wrong. But we still lived below our means and created margin because it had nothing to do with how much we had. It had everything to do with what we did with what we had. And at every season, you need to adjust this. But my point is just this. You need to pre-decide ahead of time what you're going to do and then prioritize it. And Jesus would say, seek first living is give, save, live. And again, you're not going to like this and everybody, rails against it, and that's fine. But I'm just going to say it anyway. And again, the best thing for you would go, I think you're wrong about all of this. And then you would actually read the Gospels and follow Jesus through it. That would be a huge win for me. Prioritizing something else first other than you is tangible, verifiable evidence that Jesus is Lord and master of your life. It just is. And the thing is, telling your money where to go is proof that it's not running the show, that you're in control, that it is not going to master you, that it is not going to take control of your life. And many of you are not going to believe this, but when you begin to prioritize this area of your life, if you're familiar with keystone habits, it becomes a keystone habit. It begins, and I can't really explain it, but it begins to direct so many other things in your life. And I think the reason is because this is maybe the hardest thing to surrender, because there's so much of our security and our identity wrapped up. We think money is going to provide us safety and security and identity for the future, and it doesn't. But when you surrender this, it becomes a keystone habit where other chains in your life tend to break as well. But Jesus was so unbelievably clear. The litmus test of your devotion to God is your willingness to put him and others, not include, first in this area of your life. So here's the challenge I'm going to give you. I'm going to wrap it up. For the next 2 months, choose a percentage of your income and give it away as soon as you get paid. For 2 months. And I'm not telling you anything that I haven't done for a long, long, long time. when I started working at Sports Authority, which was my first legit job, and I was super excited about it in college, and I would just set my checks aside because I was just taught to do it, and it's benefited me ever since. For the next 2 months, choose a percentage of your income and give it away as soon as you get paid. And if you're not a Jesus follower, don't give it to a church. Give it somewhere else because it will still help you. And my goal is that this would help you and benefit you, and maybe one day you would come to the place to believe that Jesus actually is a king or a master. But you don't need to factor in Jesus to do this. I want the best for you. Do this and just give it somewhere because I'm telling you, your life will be better. For 2 months, choose a percentage of your income and give it away as soon as you get paid. For my wife and I, we determined it was going to be the local church, was going to be first because we believe that flourishing local churches on mission in communities change everything. And then part of it is going to be toward organizations around food scarcity and homelessness and women's crisis because the church should be the hands and feet of Jesus to meet real physical needs in their community. And so we've lived way below our income level. And it's not because we have a ton. It has everything to do with self-control and have given, saved, lived on the rest. And I'm telling you, there's no one-to-one correlation, but what God has done through that is unbelievable. And then at every season, you got to adjust. But to go back to last week, you got to decide ahead of time, what percentage of our income are we going to live on? What percentage are we going to give away and save? And you decide what you don't pre-decide, your feelings override. And there's difference between organizations and individuals, but even organizationally. You have to, at every season, kind of recalculate and go, okay, are we doing this to be great financial stewards? Over the last a little over 2 years, our church has grown by 46%, which post-pandemic ministry, that's crazy numbers. We've grown by about 9% financially in that same time because we have so many unchurched, unreached, which just means we need a lot more Jesus followers to act like Jesus followers and support the church that they love that's impacting their life. But my point in the story is this. We had to recently make really difficult decisions and budget cuts and all of that because we want to be great stewards financially. And when growth goes up, overhead goes up and all of this other stuff, and we want to steward well what Jesus has given us for the future. And my point is you have to constantly do that in every season. And it's so important for you and your family. What percentage are we going to live on? What percentage are we going to give away? And then you decide up front what that's going to be and watch what God does. Now, this is going to be the last thing. And this is maybe as important as this. Pay attention to the internal tension this creates. This is all I'm going to ask you to do. Pay attention to the internal tension and listen closely to the conversations that you have in your mind, including the conversation that you're having with me right now. The argument, I can't believe, and whatever, and well, you don't understand. If you knew my sister, I get all of that. But pay attention to that conversation in your mind. Pay attention to your, arguments that nobody else is going to know about. Pay attention to your excuses. Pay attention to what is at this. You owe this to yourself, even if you don't change your life. What is at the center of your resistance? And here's what I'd say, and then do it anyway. I mean, we are so handcuffed to always needing to feel everything before we do anything. Come with all of your excuses, all of your arguments, I can't believe, and then just do it anyway, even though you don't feel it, and watch what God does. But pay attention to what's going on inside of you. And here's why I say this, and I'm almost done. It might be that it has nothing to do with money at all. And it has everything to do with what Jesus actually said 2,000 years ago. You are wrestling with who is going to function as Lord and Master of your life. And so Jesus says, I want you to follow me into this. In 2 weeks, this might be your next best step. Money Talks, this isn't like a come and tell you how to give. It's not one of those. This is such a tension point for marriages and individuals and college students. We hear about it all the time, so we try to do series that it's where people are living. This might be your next best step. We know this is hard. We want to help you get it right. But this is maybe where you need to go next. And here's the thing I said earlier. I had such a massive advantage because I got to watch my parents do this over and over again, specifically around the issue of giving for years. And I've told this story, so for some of you heard it, but I remember one time sneaking in, and back in the day, for some of you, there's these things called checks that you wrote, and you tore them out, and my parents would write checks, and I saw it out there, and I kind of sneaked, and I remember, this is not over exact, I kind of got mad because I knew my parents didn't make a lot, and I was like, this is why we don't have more for Christmas, because you guys are giving this much money away. And I would literally get mad about how much back in the day they would call it tithing. But my parents just over and over, every year, they would just decide ahead of time, here's what we're going to pre-decide to live on, here's what we're going to give away. And they just did that decade after decade, and they didn't have a lot. And it just impacted my life to where, as I got older, I began to do it just because I'm a practical thinker, and I was like, I think this is better. And then eventually it became a spiritual issue. But it has changed so much in my life. And now I'm teaching my kids the same thing. And here's the thing, I'm not teaching it to my kids so the church can get their money. I'm teaching my kids about Jesus' teachings because I don't want money to get them. And so I'm just going to end with this. And if you're a Jesus follower, I always save the twist the knife moment for you because you signed on to follow Jesus. All the rest of you don't have to listen to any of this. But if you're a Jesus follower, love you. But if Jesus is not first in your financial world, he's not first. And you're not really following him. You're using him. And Judas tried that. No one can serve two masters. Either you're going to hate one or you're going to love the other, or you're going to be devoted to the one and you're going to despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. But when you serve his kingdom and his righteousness first, you're better with this and you enjoy it more. And for some of you, this is such a big moment because for the first time, you're going to give all of you to all of him. And I've said this so many times, but you can set this to the side or the margins of your mind, but this is just the reality that once upon a time, seek first living changed the world. And I'll tell you, for some of you, because this is the big issue, it has the potential to change your marriage and to change relationships, has the potential to change our community. We have the potential to make a lot more change in our community if every Jesus follower took this seriously. Would you pray with me? Jesus, thank you so much that you have given us so much clarity around your word, and it is not always easy, but growth isn't easy. And so give us wisdom to know what to do with what we've heard and give us the courage to actually do it and help us to follow you, your kingdom, your righteousness, because that's what you're calling us into. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name, amen.